Israel has placed, then Israel has the right to take action of retribution. And that's what we've seen play out, although it is not really entirely the case. Let me explain. The agreement itself doesn't have a timeline for the handover of the bodies of Israeli captives, and that's because everybody knew that the logistics of that would be very difficult. There are 55 million tons of rubble across Gaza. The Israeli army continues to be present in 53% of Gaza. So for Hamas to be able to retrieve those bodies, it is extremely difficult, and it may not be possible for weeks or months. The mediators knew that. Israel knew that. But then there was a lot of domestic pressure building up, Tom. And in response to that, Israel informed the UN it would be halving the amount of aid entering into Gaza, allowed to enter into Gaza, effectively using aid and food again as a weapon of war. There was some leaks in Israeli media walking back that announcement, but we still don't know really how much or the extent to which Israel will comply with its commitments under the Trump plan. The coming hours and days will tell, and the monitors, the committee that they formed, will also have a role to play in trying to bring tempers down and make sure that the plan continues ahead as envisioned by Trump and the mediators.
And Noor, stay with us for a moment, because there's been a development after the latest return of bodies from Gaza. Israel says one of the 4 remains it received from Hamas is not of an Israeli captive. The bodies were released on Tuesday with the help of the Red Cross as part of the Gaza ceasefire deal. They were taken to a forensic centre in Tel Aviv for testing. OK, Noor, can you just talk us through a little bit more around this and the threat that this could actually potentially unravel the ceasefire deal?
Well, in theory, it shouldn't, because this is a complication that was foreseen. In fact, it happened in previous ceasefires where bodies of Israeli captives were handed over. Let's remember, there are no DNA labs right now in Gaza, no way for Hamas and the other factions to verify conclusively that the bodies they're handing over are those of the Israeli captives. The process of retrieving the bodies is extremely complicated and risky. So this danger of a mix-up was in the minds of everybody involved in negotiating this agreement. In theory, it should not derail the proceeding of phase 1 and possibly phase 2. But again, there's a lot of domestic pressure in Israel, and Netanyahu's trying to maneuver through that. His coalition partners who wanted to return to war as soon as the living captives are handed over, and the public, the families of Israeli captives who want their loved ones home, even if if they're dead. And so a lot is happening domestically that is influencing at least the rhetoric of this, and also impacting the amount of aid urgently needed in Gaza that Israel is allowing into the Gaza Strip.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Noor O'Day, for us there in Amman. Well, staying with this, we are joined now by Lorenzo Kamal, who is a professor of international history at the University of Turin. He joins us from Rome. Thanks very much for being with us again, Lorenzo. Can you just give us an idea? How does this ceasefire, with the complications that we have seen so far, how does this compare with past attempts at peace? Does history give us any clues at all about where this could potentially lead?
Yes, first of all, let's stress that the World Bank in 2022 informed us that the Gaza Strip had a literacy rate of 98%. This compared, for instance, to the 79% of the US. So this piece of land has had a very strong education system, and that comes on top of a millenary history with deep scars that are very much linked also to one anniversary, that is the anniversary of today, when 77 years ago, precisely on 15th of October 1948, the Israeli forces started the Operation Yoav in the desert of Negev. And as a result of this operation, the number of refugees in the Gaza Strip rose from 100,000 to 230,000, so more than double the number of refugees. And at the time, Michael Gallant, that was the father of Yoav Gallant, the defense minister who said that the Palestinians are human animals, participated in that operation, named his son Yoav precisely to celebrate that operation. So let's say that if you look for precedents, we see that from 1948, 1967, a number of times in which we see after the scars of history, there was an attempt to reach an agreement. At the end of the day, particularly the stronger side was able to, in many ways, to turn on his side the balance, and so in this case to violate a number of agreements. This occurred, of course, the Palestinian side as well, but certainly the stronger side had more chances in that respect.
OK, we just heard from our correspondent, Noor O'Day, saying the domestic pressure is really piling up on Netanyahu at the moment. Do you think that Israel's actually going to stick to its commitments under the ceasefire deal, or, you know, we're already seeing signs that it is really starting to unravel?
Yes, first of all, the pressure is more apparent than real. It has to do much with the hostages, but much less at the, let's say, at the political level. The Israeli authorities are violating the ceasefire by continuing to restrict humanitarian aid, and the implementation terms that were signed by the Israeli authorities were very clear in contemplating the possibility that Hamas won't be able to find or to return the remains of death captives that aren't in its custody within 72 hours. So it was very clear that in this agreement, there was a possibility that they were not able to do so. That said, Netanyahu is the only prime minister since the 70s, the Israeli prime minister since the 1970s, that never signed any sort of agreement of peace agreement or something similar to that with the Palestinians, and there is no reason to believe that they will start to do so now. So let's say that in practical terms, this agreement to a large extent, this ceasefire is largely a facade that most likely, unfortunately and sadly, will be in a few weeks or days will open the floor to the tragedy that we already witnessed.
OK, we'll have to leave things there for the moment, but thank you so much, Lorenzo, for your thoughts. Lorenzo Kamal for us in Rome. Well, Dan Perry joins us. He is the former editor of the Associated Press in Europe, the Middle East and Africa. He's also the publisher of the Ask Questions Later on Substack. He joins us from Tel Aviv. First of all, can I just get your reaction to Israel coming out in the last hour or so, saying one of the bodies it received from Hamas was not a captive?
I think they also said they are willing to accept that that was a mistake. So whereas it's very unfortunate, I don't think that is a deal breaker or a real change in the basic narrative. But there are two things that are absolutely deal breakers and changes, which is Hamas holding on to the vast majority of the hostage bodies, and more than some indication that Hamas has no intention of disarming. I've been saying for 2 years that the return of the hostages and the elimination of Hamas as a military force in Gaza are their goals. And I hear all these other guests claiming Israeli politics and other complications and secret desires to continue the war nonetheless, and it's basically false. It's real simple. They want the bodies and they want Hamas to disarm as agreed, or at least as appears in a 20-point plan.
Yeah, just on the return of the bodies of the deceased captives, everyone knew that was going to be extremely difficult given just how decimated, especially northern Gaza has been, and that it was going to take some time. So is there any acknowledgement of that in Israel at the moment?
Yes, there is. But it boils down to lack of trust. There is great concern in Israel that Hamas will try to hold on to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bodies that they know where they are in order to keep them as future leverage for future consideration. Now, Hamas did this for over a decade with the bodies of Hadar Golden and Oren Shul, and they expect Hamas to do that again. So there are 28 bodies. When Hamas initially said that we may not be able to find all of them within the 48 or 72-hour window, which is now expired or is about to expire, there was some understanding of that, yes. They're not completely unreasonable, and indeed it's true. Not that Israel controls 53% still, because that's not where the hostages were. But it's true that there's a lot of rubble, and you could sort of envision where a few bodies might be difficult to find. But the problem is that Hamas walked right into the suspicion that they're going to play games here by producing none but 4 of the bodies. So 24 of the 28 bodies they have not produced. At this point, I would say even the most peacenik Israeli is convinced that this is untrue and it is games and it is in fact a violation.
Right. The other point that you raised earlier was the disarmament of Hamas. Donald Trump's vowed to disarm Hamas violently if he has to. Does that give Netanyahu an out or an excuse to escalate things again?
Look, anyone who's heard me on your channel and elsewhere knows that I'm extremely skeptical of and indeed cynical about Netanyahu. So your framing of the question is not completely wrong, but in this case it misses the point. Netanyahu, I think, does want the war to end because regardless of any actual, peaceable intention, if you look at the politics, his coalition is done anyway. He has elections in a few months no matter what. So preserving his coalition no longer is the imperative that it once was, where the far right that indeed wants continued war, but is a tiny minority, could potentially bring him down if he prematurely ended the war. He now needs to end the war because the Israeli people are really tired of the war and distrust his motivations, many of them. So he wants the war over, but you're back down to the 2 basic things that so many people that you guys interview seem to simply reject in their effort to complicate the narrative. They want the hostages, they want Hamas disarmed. The issue is that Hamas never agreed. Hamas agreed to return the hostages, or at least living ones apparently, in exchange for an end to the war temporarily, permanently, no one knows. They haven't made real public statements. Trump pretended like they agreed. And he not only pretended like they agreed, but he set up this monumental festival all over the region in the Sharm el-Sheikh, and he declared the war over. But that was based on the understanding that everyone accepted the 20 points, which Israel did, and which Hamas did not. And if indeed Hamas doesn't disarm, which in my view would not be a violation, because I never heard them agree, but it would, contradict what Trump said, then we all have a very big problem. Because then Netanyahu will face a situation where the deal he got, the hostages for an end to the war, he could have gotten a year ago, and the intervening year was a huge waste of life and treasure. That's a political problem. Indeed.
I guess it goes to the fact that there is so little detail and the vagaries of that 20-point plan. We'll have to leave it there for the moment, though. Dan Perry for us in Tel Aviv. There's been intense overnight fighting between Pakistani and Afghan forces in a remote northwestern border region. There are reports of casualties on both sides. Now, this is the second time in recent days that the 2 neighbours have traded fire. Tensions flared after Afghan forces attacked Pakistani soldiers on the weekend, accusing them of violating their territory. All border crossings between Pakistan and Afghanistan remain closed. The unrest has displaced people from nearby villages.
This fighting's been going on since early morning, and the people who live close to the border are leaving the area. They're worried, and they want both countries to stop this war. People are in a very difficult situation. Shells are falling in people's homes.
Well, the fighting has taken place across areas along the porous border between the two countries. They include the Shaman-Kandahar border, a major international crossing point between Pakistan and Afghanistan. The Karam border in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, the Zarzai Maidan sector in Khost province, and the Nangarhar crossing, a major trade route between the two neighbours. Well, Kamal Haider has been covering this story for us. He joins us from the Torkham border crossing. Kamal, a serious escalation overnight. Can you just give us a bit of an update, first of all, on the latest about what you know about the fighting there?
Well, this is indeed the most serious exchange since that exchange on Saturday, which was on a wide border. This is a 2,600-kilometer long border with Afghanistan. It's mostly mountainous and a porous border at that. Now, last night, the Pakistani forces said that they had unprovoked fire from the Afghan side in the Kuram agency, and that Pakistan then responded with counterfire, destroying at least one Afghan tank and taking out a post. Also, last night, there was a heavy exchange of fire on the Chaman-Spin Boldak border that connects to Kandahar, in which there are a number of casualties, civilian casualties as well, because these villages are along the border and they also received fire. Pakistani security forces have also denied a report saying that there was no refusal by the Afghans as far as the Pakistani delegation, which was reported earlier, that they had been refused their visas to go to Afghanistan. So that denial coming from the military. Both sides, of course, accuse each other of starting the fire first. Both sides are claiming that they have inflicted heavy casualties on the other side. It is indeed a dangerous escalation, and this is the second time this is happening. The defense minister is not ruling out further escalation if there is more fire coming from the Afghan side.
Kamal, can you just give us a bit of context here about why this is all happening now? Why have things flared up again?
Well, just a few weeks ago, there were deadly attacks against Pakistani security forces. At least 24 Pakistani soldiers, including senior officers, were killed. Pakistan has been complaining all along that the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which is a banned outfit here, which takes responsibility for several attacks on the security forces across this bordering region, that they were having sanctuaries in Afghanistan, that they were getting help from the Afghan side. And because of those casualties, Pakistan decided to launch what the Afghans said was air incursions into Afghan airspace. After that, the Afghan side decided to retaliate, and this was happening at the time when the Afghan Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi was in Delhi. The Afghan side retaliating, and then Pakistan counter-retaliation from the Pakistani side that started all this. So indeed, it is a volatile area, and of course, very unpredictable as to where this will all go, because neither side can afford a fight. Both sides, of course, have had good relations in the past, and some leaders here in Pakistan are saying that they should exercise maximum restraint and try to solve this diplomatically. Friendly countries, China, Russia, the Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and even Iran are urging both sides to step back from the brink and to try to ease tensions.
OK, thank you so much, Kamal, for all of that. Kamal Haider for us at the Torkham border crossing. Madagascar's military has taken charge after ousting President Ange Rajawel, who's fled for his safety. Parliament voted to impeach Rajawel on Tuesday after weeks of youth-led protests triggered by shortages of water and electricity. The president had refused growing demands to step down despite the protest movement. The military has now promised to hold a referendum within 2 years. Well, Famida Miller joins us now from the capital, Antananarivo. And Famida, it looks relatively quiet there after yesterday's excitement and the protests preceding it. So can you just give us an idea of what life is like in the capital right now?
Well, that's exactly right. It certainly is quiet in Antananarivo. People are continuing with their daily business as they would any other day, even 24 hours after a military coup. We are awaiting word from the senior officer of the CAPSAT unit as to what happens next and how it plans to govern over the next 2-year period. But for now, things remain quiet and there aren't many visible restrictions across the city.
OK, thank you so much, Famita, for that update. Famita Miller for us there in Antananarivo. The Greek government is withholding millions of dollars worth of European Union subsidies while it investigates a major corruption scandal. Thousands of farmers, some with no other income, say they've been hit hard by the move. John Soropoulos reports from Seris in northern Greece.
Pandelis Kirtzelis sheep earn him more than $500,000 a year from organic milk, which is made into feta cheese. So the fact that the government owes him $6,000 in subsidies might not seem important. But feed costs him $1,000 a day, and cash flow is always an issue. An outbreak of smallpox has further raised costs and tensions. The government is withholding EU subsidies while it investigates a major scandal discovered by the European Prosecutor's Office, in which millions were paid to people who weren't real farmers. Kirtzelis believes the government is complicit.
Those of us who are real shepherds and have no other income are being penalised. The government should resign because they were in charge when the money went missing. They turned a blind eye to enrich their own people.
There are 2,700 affected breeders in this area of Greece alone, many with indigenous species like these water buffalo. Those producers often rely on government support. Greek farmers are waiting for $500 million worth of subsidies that were meant to have been paid in June. The government admits at least $25 million were fraudulently claimed by people who weren't real farmers. The European prosecutor suspects hundreds of millions may be missing. The head of the Seris Breeders Cooperative told me she suspected the fraud a decade ago.
We noticed that a lot of people who were close to politicians or were elected to local office or were considered big people locally were very prosperous, whereas these people didn't work. When we asked, we were told they were animal breeders. These people had no animals.
The government says 1,000 people have been indicted in the ongoing investigation, including officials of the ruling New Democracy Party. In the meantime, dishonesty is added to a list of challenges farmers face: a drying climate and rising costs. And the damage is long-term. Farmers here say their children are leaving in droves for other countries. John Soropoulos, Al Jazeera, Seris in northern Greece.
Still ahead on this Al Jazeera NewsHour, Myanmar's junta celebrates the 10th anniversary of a ceasefire to end an ethnic conflict while a civil war rages on. And in sport, big news for Qatar. We'll show you how the 2022 hosts secured their return to the World Cup.
Let's get going with your weather report across Europe and Africa. Quite the mess we have in the central Mediterranean. It's throwing a lot of rain just off the coast of Naples right down to Palermo. Also looking like a soggy forecast in Sicily. This energy will continue to move eastward, but it's slow moving and it is bringing the threat of some flooding. Some of this rain will drop down into northeast Algeria and northern Tunisia. Also the risk of seeing some flooding there, and also happening today. We're getting clipped with a bit of rain through the Bosphorus in Istanbul. Those winds picking up too, so that's going to drop down your temperature to just 19 degrees. Other end of the Mediterranean, now that rain has pushed away, look how hot it is in Portugal. Lisbon, 29, maybe 30 degrees today on Wednesday. And through Central and Eastern Europe, pretty typical weather this time of the year. Some sun, mostly cloudy, a few sprinkles as well. Same goes in the northwest, but much cooler. Look toward western Russia, Moscow at 4. Could be cold enough to see a rain-snow mix there overnight. Rains are pepping up again, once again through West Africa for southern Nigeria and Ghana. And to the south we go. It is a pretty brisk wind for places like Mozambique's capital, Maputo. Looking at wind gusts today of 50 kilometers per hour. See you later.
A mother, a survivor of drug-facilitated sexual assault by dozens of men for over a decade. In the dock, her husband, the depraved mastermind. At her side, her daughter, the driving force who took up the fight, demanding justice and a shift of blame from the many victims to the perpetrators of horrific crimes across France. Witness presents No More Shame on Al Jazeera.
The latest news as it breaks.
Despite harsh circumstances, they hold on to the hope of returning to their homes safely and rebuilding their lives.
With detailed coverage.
After October the 7th, the children born on that day have known nothing but war.
From the heart of the story.
Thousands are forced to make the same impossible choice of no shelter at all or shelter inside homes that could fall with the next strike or even on their own.
You're watching Al Jazeera. Just a reminder of our top stories this hour. Israel is still limiting the number of aid trucks allowed to enter Gaza nearly a week after a ceasefire deal was agreed. It has told the UN it will only allow in 300 trucks daily, but even fewer than that have made it into the Strip. Israel says one of the 4 bodies it received from Hamas is not an Israeli captive. The bodies were released on Tuesday as part of the Gaza ceasefire deal. And there's been fighting between Pakistani and Afghan forces in a northwestern border region. Tensions flared at the weekend after Afghan forces attacked Pakistani soldiers, accusing them of violating their territory. Border crossings between the two nations remain closed. Kenyans are in mourning after the death of former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. Hundreds have gathered in the capital, Nairobi, to pay tribute to the veteran opposition leader. Odinga was receiving medical treatment at a hospital in India when he suffered a heart attack. Raila Odinga was a prominent figure in Kenya's struggle for democracy. He served as Prime Minister from 2008 to 2013. He also ran unsuccessfully for the presidency 5 times. Catherine Soy takes a look back at his life and career.
Raila Odinga was an enigma in Kenya's politics. Born in 1945 into one of the country's political dynasties, he would become a revolutionary in the eyes of many. Some described him as contradictory. To others, he was opportunistic. In the 1980s, Odinga was implicated alongside others in trying to overthrow the government of then-President Daniel Arap Moi, who was accused of being a dictator. In the 90s, he was among opposition leaders who fought for greater democracy, ushering in a multi-party system of governance. He ran for the presidency 5 times. After being defeated on several occasions, he claimed his vote was stolen. In 2008, Kenya faced its worst post-election violence after President Mwai Kibaki secured a 2nd term in office. Kibaki was accused of rigging the vote, and more than 1,000 people were killed and many displaced in ethnic conflicts that broke out in some parts of the country. Odinga came in 2nd. He believed the poll was rigged in favor of his competitor. But Odinga became Prime Minister, and the two later signed a peace agreement and formed a government coalition.
What I would say cuts through his entire career, the resilience, and that the principles he started with from when he was a young man are the same principles that he stands with today, so many decades later.
Odinga's father, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, was the vice president when Kenya declared independence from Britain in 1963. Jomo Kenyatta was the president. To this date, many Kenyans say that the country is dominated by a handful of wealthy political families at the expense of other ethnic communities.
We need to
in the Chicago area of responsibility. That includes Illinois and 5 neighboring states. Collateral arrests, or people arrested while ICE is out patrolling the city, have been a major part of Operation Midway Blitz, and now a federal judge has imposed new restrictions on agents. Attorneys with the National Immigrant Justice Center in Chicago say the number of warrantless arrests in just the past 2 weeks have skyrocketed. Their case against ICE, starting with 26 people, now up to at least 200.
What we have seen now on a much larger scale is federal agents indiscriminately stopping and arresting individuals without warrants.
A family scooped up at the bean late last month. Collateral warrantless arrest during a raid at a home in Elgin, with Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem present, posting this video on social media.
He actually had his work permit to be working here legally.
Alliance father Abel Orozco picked up earlier this year. ICE reports reviewed by the I-team confirming agents did not have a warrant, instead creating one after taking him into custody.
My father was the main breadwinner of the family, so having him gone, it's hard.
All examples of what U.S. District Judge Jeffrey Cummings ruled is an ongoing pattern of ICE violating the terms of a consent decree. NIJC attorneys successfully arguing agents produced no warrants, civil or criminal, for the arrests. Cummings taking particular issue with instructions to ICE agents to carry blank I-200 forms, civil immigration warrants, on their person in the field to fill them out on the spot, calling ICE's arguments it can do so lawfully meritless.
If they made a warrantless arrest, they need to justify and document the specific information.
Under the federal consent decree with ICE, to arrest someone with or without a warrant, ICE agents are required to meet 2 criteria. Is there probable cause to believe someone is in the U.S. illegally, and are they also a flight risk? ABC 7 chief legal analyst Gil Sofer says the government is likely to appeal the ruling.
Well, we'll see if it changes operations on the ground. He's certainly sending a shot across the bow, and that, if it's going to be abided by, that's going to slow things down and really impose rigor around the process.
Immigrant advocates intensely emotional over the result.
To our Black and brown people and immigrants, it does not always seem to be that this earth wants us, but we want us, and that can be enough.
Now, the Department of Homeland Security said in a statement to the I-team, quote, DHS complies with all lawful court orders and is addressing this matter with the court. NIJC says it will seek the release of hundreds of people they claim were unlawfully arrested.
All right.
A lot to come out of that.
Just sticking with exactly what the law says here.
Absolutely, and we'll see what comes from DHS and how they handle this in court.
Now to an update on a story we've been following since February of this year. You might remember 12 employees were arrested at a Liberty Mexican restaurant, El Potro, during an ICE operation.
At the time, Clay County Sheriff Will Aiken told us that federal agents were there looking for a person wanted on a warrant for a child sex crime.
So fast forward to last week, a federal judge in Chicago ruled that the 12 arrests made that day were illegal.
They claimed ICE agents violated a previous court agreement prohibiting them from arresting undocumented people without warrants or probable cause, something the judge says is lacking in this case.
KSHB 41's Caitlin Canute also found out through new court documents last week that ICE agents went to El Potro looking for someone with a felony narcotics conviction, not a warrant for child sex crimes.
Since the judge's ruling that ICE operation was illegal, a viewer did reach out to us and ask what happened to the employees who were arrested.
So today I sat down with an immigration attorney, Rekha Sharma Crawford. She's representing the El Potro employees, and I asked her to find the answers. She told me 11 of the 12 employees are still in the U.S. and 1 has left the country.
They're very relieved. They understand that it's not necessarily the end of the process or even the end of the case per se, but certainly they are relieved to say that some vindication there to say what happened to them was not right. Could immigration go and actually get warrants and do it correctly and restart the process? I mean, yes, they could, right? But at this point, we're waiting on the immigration judge here to make the ruling that is consistent with the federal court's holding.
Currently, the 11 employees remaining in the U.S. are out on bond from the original arrest. Court pleadings, motions, and documents are pending before the immigration court. A spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security told us, quote, DHS complies with all lawful court orders and is addressing this matter with the court.
Something we'll definitely keep an eye on.
A federal judge rules against U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement in the arrest of 11 people near Kansas City earlier this year. At the El Potro Mexican Cafe in Liberty, ICE agents arrested 12 immigrant restaurant workers. Now, they had a warrant to arrest one worker, but a judge recently ruled the other 11 arrests made without a warrant went against the consent decree. And that prohibits ICE from arresting people without warrants or probable cause.
It's also, in my opinion, a win for the public because it really is about making sure that the guardrails that define American principles are not taken off.
The recent ruling awarded relief to 22 people, including the 11 people arrested in Liberty. In addition to Missouri and Kansas, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Kentucky are also under that consent decree.
A federal judge rules against Immigration and Customs Enforcement in the Worid restaurant earlier this year. The raid in February ended with 12 workers arrested, but officers only had one warrant. Fox 4's Lexi French explains the impact of the court decision.
This is the site where 12 immigrant restaurant workers were arrested by ICE agents earlier this year. The building is now up for lease, but it used to be El Potro Mexican Cafe. A federal judge recently ruled that 11 of those warrantless arrests went against a 2022 consent decree.
And the court had witnesses and evidence and basically looked at all of the circumstances surrounding the arrests in Liberty and made a finding that yes, indeed, ICE had violated the terms of the settlement agreement.
That agreement prohibits ICE from arresting people without warrants or probable cause. On February 7th, ICE officers went to the El Potro Mexican Cafe in Liberty with a single warrant, but arrested 12 employees.
And in this instance, it's not only just the settlement agreement, but there's a whole statute that defines when a warrantless arrest can occur. And so the remedy for that is, in this instance, it would have been release and a return of their bond.
Rekha Sharma Crawford is a Kansas City immigration attorney representing immigrant workers arrested without warrants in Liberty. She points out that the case did not question the government's right to arrest people for immigration violations.
They could certainly go back in and rearrest these individuals using the proper protocols. Certainly they could. But the fact of the matter is that we as a society have the right to demand that our constitutional protections are being fulfilled in a way that law enforcement has been told to do, to administer them. It's also, in my opinion, a win for the public because it really is about making sure that the guardrails that define American principles are not taken off.
The federal judge also extended the consent decree prohibiting ICE from arresting people without warrants or probable cause until February of next year. In addition to Kansas and Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Kentucky are under that same consent decree. In Liberty, Lexi French, Fox 4, working for you.
A judge in Kansas City is challenging the legality of an ICE raid at a Mexican restaurant in Liberty. The judge calling some of the arrests warrantless.
KBC 9's Matt Evans is at the federal courthouse downtown breaking down this court filing and what happens next to the people involved.
As part of this 52-page opinion issued by a federal court in Illinois last week, a judge ruled that 11 of the 12 people arrested at a Liberty Mexican restaurant earlier this year were detained illegally.
People were fighting. They were scared.
That February raid was among the first to gain widespread attention in the metro after the Trump administration began its immigration enforcement crackdown. ICE agents arrested 12 people at El Potro's Mexican restaurant in Liberty, saying they were looking for a person who was accused of committing a violent crime against a child. Of those 12, one person has since been deported, and the other 11 were detained illegally, according to a federal judge.
I think it's a huge decision in the sense that it points out
a gap that was missing.
Kansas City immigration attorney Michael Sharma Crawford represents those 11 people and says this decision could have wide-ranging implications nationwide.
I think now the ability for other people to extrapolate on that across the country is going to be huge.
The reason behind that ruling is because ICE agents did not have a warrant for the arrests, and they could not prove 11 of those people detained were a flight risk.
If ICE wants to get a warrant, come back and arrest them, that's one thing. That's certainly their prerogative. But the just snatching strangers off the street, that's the message of the court. You don't get to do that.
This case continues in a federal court in Illinois next